I'm going to tell you the simplest way to explain decluttering to anyone. I'm also going to give you some ADHD tips. All you need is a glass and some water. And now to do this, you need to know what the glass represents and what the water represents. The glass represents any place you want to declutter, your room, your house, a section of a room, any place you want to do that. Now, the other thing is the water represents all that stuff in that place. So, for example, if you have nothing in that room, you would have an empty glass. There's nothing there, no bed, no desk, nothing, not a drop of water would be in your glass. But if you have a lot of stuff and it's getting to the point to where it's overflowing, then you would have a glass of water that's overflowing. That is what it will represent. And now besides that, you want to get to the perfect level for you. And that's going to vary per person, right? However much stuff you want in your room. And so that would be represented by how much you actually fill up the cup or fill up your glass with the water. The more stuff you have that you're comfortable with, the higher the level of the water would be in your glass. The less stuff you have, the lower the level of water would be in your glass. And you could see this just by pouring water in the different glasses and at the different levels if you want to do that, right? So this is a very easy way to understand, okay, hey, I'm trying to get to this one level. I don't want to be too high. I don't want to be too low. Now, everything in between that is when you're going to add some items into your room, then you would actually add some water into the glass. And as you see, the water would keep rising and rising as you add more stuff, and you're going to get closer to the overflow level. Now, when you start taking stuff out of your room, that is when you're going to reduce the water in the glass. And so you pour some water out for the things that you would take out of the room, and you're going to get closer and closer to the level to where there's nothing in there. And you don't want a room with nothing in it. You want something in the room. You're just trying to figure out how to get to the level of stuff that you feel like is good and okay for you. And remember when I said it's not good to have an empty glass at all? Well, there is one case to where it actually is okay. And that is if you have a whole bunch of stuff and you're trying to figure out what in the heck do I have in my room at this point, right? Like you just don't know. Take all that stuff out of that place and then get to a place to where you can see everything. You can see all the stuff that you have. You can see the good stuff, the bad stuff, the stuff that you want to throw away, stuff that's broken. You see it all and figure out what stuff do I actually want to keep and what stuff do I actually want to declutter. And so in this case, you've poured all the water out of your glass. There's nothing left in there because you've taken it all out of that place. Now, as you throw stuff away, you're going to go, hey, throwing this away, I'm keeping this. The stuff you're going to keep, you're going to actually start putting back into the places that you find for them to where they fit. In that case, once you start doing that, then you are actually adding things back into the room. And so then you'd actually put back water into your glass and start filling it up. It just won't be as much water in your glass as before because now you don't have as many items. And this can be an important process to do, especially when you have ADHD, because you might tend to keep things a little bit longer than they need to be kept, or you might have something and just forgot that you have it, or you might be intending to throw away something and have never thrown away even though it's broken or you don't use it. All that stuff would be in that place, and you just have this extra stuff that you know that you're never going to use and just is clutter there. And now the next thing is sometimes we start out with just a little bit of stuff. We just have a little bit of stuff in this room. We feel pretty good because it's not cluttered yet. And then as we get more things over time, we start actually seeing that room get cluttered. And so to represent this, you'd have a little bit of water. And as you start to get more and more stuff, that water level is going to rise. It's going to get to the point to where it's like, wow, I'm getting way past my point of that perfect water level, that perfect level of stuff that I wanted. And then you're going to get close to overflowing level to where everything is just too much. And now you're kind of panicking and stuff, trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to do? I have way too much stuff now. And so this is where you have to try to figure out, okay, how am I going to keep this level of stuff down so I'm not at the overflow level, basically. So what you're going to do is instead of always taking stuff in and not get rid of anything at all, or taking way more stuff in that you actually get rid of, what you're going to do is do the 1 in, 1 out rule. What that means is that when you're taking an item into your room, you get rid of something else. And so what this does is that you're not going to increase your clutter for the room. And so if you look at your glass and you see that, hey, I'm at this one level in my glass, if you're doing this, that level is probably not going to increase. It might increase a little bit, but generally it's going to stay the same. I'm not increasing, add more water and get to that overflow level. I'm not decreasing so much that I'm getting down to the level I don't want to be at, right? The thing is, that does not mean that all the stuff in your room is organized. It doesn't mean there's not stuff that you can declutter in there. It just means you're not bringing in any new clutter and increasing the level of clutter from its current state. And so you may still have stuff that you need to get rid of. You may still have stuff you need to organize. And really be careful if you have ADHD, because you might be prone to buying stuff impulsively. I know that I've done that sometimes. And if you're prone to buying stuff impulsively, that means you might be bringing in one item or 5 items or 10 items into your home, into that room. And now with all that, you have to figure out, how many things can I get rid of? And if you don't get rid of as many items as you have brought in, then that means you are going to bring in things, and those things could be things that are useful, but it might also mean you bring in stuff that's not useful at all, and then it does just become clutter. And now think of the level of organization that you have in your room as how much movement is in the water. So if you have a calm, serene water in your glass, for example, that you're looking at, you feel like, hey, my room's good, it's organized well, I'm good to go. However, the more your room starts to get disorganized, the more movement you start to see in the water. Now, if you have a lot of disorganization, you might see the cup just having water splash all over the place. If it's really super disorganized, you might have a whirlpool in the cup, all right? So you don't want to get to that level. So the thing is, even if you have the whirlpool going around to where you just know this is way too disorganized, as you start to organize things, then the water is going to calm down. And so you can go from the whirlpool kind of disorganization, really rough water organization, back down to the more serene kind and calm kind of organization in your room. And don't get discouraged if you start organizing stuff and you're not really seeing a whole bunch of progress. Like, you still see this huge level of disorganization in your room. Each item that you put back in its place, each item you just declutter out of your room and just make your room more organized, starts to have an effect. These little bit of items, little bit of steps, little steps do make a difference over time. You are making progress over time. So if you were looking at your glass, you may still see that there is a lot going on there, but eventually you'll see that you have made a huge difference as you keep taking things out and organizing things to where you get to the level that you really want to be. And here's something else. Sometimes we feel like we got to get done with everything in one day, in one sitting, and we just go gung-ho and go through and try to declutter. What this looks like, if you have a glass of water, is that you are going through and you're trying just to pour out all the water that you can at one time in one sitting. You have a goal that you want to get to, and you're going to do it all in one time that you're going to go and do that. Now, you can split it up, which is what I recommend. Maybe a few hours at a time, take a break, come back and do it, or maybe even split it up in different days. And this would look like, hey, I'm making that progress, but I'm not taking out as much water each time. But eventually you get to the same place. Now, instead of stressing yourself out, going through and doing it all at one time, it's good to take breaks and break it down, especially when you have ADHD and you're trying to really focus on something. And you get to the point to where you're just like, hey, I can't focus on it anymore. I'm frustrated. And so this will help you. And you could be at the point to where you're like, hey, I want to move items from one room to another room. In this case, what you need to do is get a second glass out. And then you're going to look at the first room and the second room and decide, okay, how much stuff is in the first room? How much stuff is in the second room? You fill up those water levels to represent that. And then as you decide, I'm going to take this stuff and move it to the other room, you start pouring out water from one glass into the other glass. Now, what you do have to be aware of is that as you're adding stuff to the other room, you don't want to get it to so much stuff that you have reached the overflow point to where you just have too much stuff in that room. So you will have to figure out, okay, I'm going to put this extra stuff here. what am I going to take out of the room that I'm moving the stuff to? Or am I moving stuff from one room to the next room, like just rearranging? Then, that's different, right? Because now you're taking stuff and moving it from one room to the next room. But you need to be aware of wherever, how much stuff you have in the first room, how much stuff you have in the second room, and make sure that you don't create a big clutter pile in one room and have the second room looking like, oh, it's serene, it's nice and everything. But the other room that you have is just like cluttered up, and you have so much stuff in there, and you don't know what you're gonna do, and you don't have any more space in that room. And so now you've just created one issue as to where you kind of had rooms that were separate together that were kind of organized. Now you have one room that's just super disorganized, and you have to go and tackle that room again. And that's just more work for you. So be aware if you're moving stuff around to just keep an eye on how much stuff you have in each room and how much stuff you're putting into one room and taking away from one room. And now here is something else. All the water on the bottom of your glass, right? That represents all the old stuff that you didn't know that you have, or the stuff that you're just keeping that you just had forever, right? That's just the stuff that you just have thought about maybe one or two times and then just forgot that you had it. That's all that stuff. Everything above that is newer stuff until you get to the top to where it's really new, right? Now, if you have stuff that's in the way with all the stuff that's newer, then you can see you may see that stuff, but you may not even know of the stuff that's on the bottom. You actually have to get rid of some stuff on top, which will lower the water level to get to the things on the bottom of the water to know that, hey, I still have these things. You might discover things that you just didn't even think that you had anymore and be like, oh, that's where that was. But you had to get rid of some stuff so that you can get to the bottom and get all the stuff that you've forgotten about that's hidden way back in the closet in your attic that you just don't see anymore, that might be broken, you put into a corner and you just didn't even know that it was there anymore, or something you just discovered and like, hey, I didn't even know I had one of these anymore. All that stuff is behind or under or hidden by the stuff that you had that's new, because you're just not seeing it out in the open. And with ADHD, it might be out of sight, out of mind. Like you just don't even remember it because of the fact that it is hidden somewhere or not in your sight to where you can visually see it, and you haven't even thought about it until you find it again. And now you don't have to just pour your glasses of water. You can actually use other things to represent how much you're getting rid of. You can use a straw if you're going to get rid of a little itty bitty amount. You take a straw, take that water and put it somewhere else. Or you can use a spoon to represent, hey, I'm getting rid of a little bit more, not enough to pour, but a little bit more out of my room and everything. Now, the thing you need to be warned against is if you're taking some water from one room and putting it into another room, then what can happen is you cause disorganization in that other room because you put stuff in the room and you don't really have a place for it. In that case, you would be stirring up the other room. Basically, take your spoon and stir up, the water. Take your straw and stir up the water. And that just represents the disorganization that you actually brought into the other room. And so you've got to be careful of that. So what you want to do is make sure that if you're taking stuff out of one room, make sure that you're not creating disorganization or adding clutter to another room. But these are two different ways that you can actually represent that you've gotten rid of something out of your rooms. And here's something else to think about. When you see a glass of water, you can see right through it, see from one side to the next side. Glass is clear, everything looks good. Now, when you walk into a room with ADHD, it's kind of the same way. Everything looks kind of good. If everything's kind of in its place, you're like, oh, this is pretty good. But what if you are missing something? You look around the room, you just missed the thing that you just passed by, didn't even recognize. Or what if something is behind something else and you don't realize that it's there and you might have been looking for it. You just don't realize it's behind something else, or maybe it's under something else. And so if you have ADHD and walk into a room and look at it, and you may see it as being organized completely because you don't see anything wrong, but things could be hidden. Disorganization could be hidden. Clutter could be hidden. So see how the glass of water represents that. You might see everything good, but there could be stuff hidden and it's just tied into everything else that's in the room. And so you don't know what's clutter and what's not until you kind of go through and dig through and figure out, okay, this is the good stuff, this is the bad stuff, this is the stuff I need to keep. And then you're going to go through and try to take your water level down to where you find that it's really calm and serene. Now, how much water do you have in your glass probably? And how calm is it? And how much are you actually going to get rid of? And if you want to know more about decluttering with ADHD, I do have a video that gives more tips, and you can click that video on the screen right now.